Alright people, this is the second video on things that may be the downfall of mankind. My first one was the explanation of our weather patterns, how they've changed, and how people are calling them extreme weather, and how I'm telling you, in reality, it is the new norm. Watch the video, you'll understand why it's important to the future of mankind. But now we have another one, something that might be serious for man, but we have the ability to fix it. This is the world's monetary system. In 1929 we had the Wall Street crash. This was the first time ever that the world's financial structure gave us a warning. What followed that crash was 7 years of recession. The reason for that being that governments couldn't print the money to buy their way out of it. In those days we worked on the gold standard. The gold standard meant that if a country needed $1 billion to finance its business and its day-to-day living of people, and they only had gold reserves to 900 million, then it meant they couldn't print the money over and above 900 million. If you remember, it used to say on a note, "I promise to pay the bearer on demand." That meant you could go into a bank and give them the note and say, "Can I have the gold please?" Governments got round it by putting restrictions on what gold you could keep. You could have a watch or a ring, but you couldn't own bullion. So they got round it. But the deal here is that the limitations on government of what they could and couldn't do meant that they didn't have the tools to get their way through the recession. How did that recession end? In the traditional way, when countries could see the threat from Hitler's Germany, and governments released and directed money into rearming. They were making weapons, they were making bullets, and that got us out of the depression in the 1930s. These days we don't have the gold standard. So in 2008, when we had crash number 2, and worldwide the banks were all saying we've got no money, we're skinned, and governments had to leap in and get them out of it. But this time round they were able to print whatever they needed to get out of jail. Now you've got to understand something here. Let's take the UK. If we need £2 trillion in circulation to underwrite the economy of the country, if we only had 1.8 trillion in circulation, the country would be guaranteed to go into recession. Okay? Do it the other way. Put a bit more in than what we really need, make sure things are okay. But if you have a need for 2 trillion in circulation and you actually have 2.2 trillion in circulation, the likelihood is that you will take an inflation hit, and the inflation hit might well correspond to the amount of money in circulation. So if you overdo the money supply by 10%, you can expect a 10% inflation rate. So you have to be rather careful. You have to have the right amount of money, not too much and certainly not less than. So the money supply very much controls your ability to do things financially. But the crisis in 2008 left many countries around the world printing whatever they needed to get out of jail. That was not a good thing. Yes, the government can take back money from the money supply system later, but what is the damage in the meantime? You have to balance the damage that inflation could do with the damage of not being able to bring your economy out of recession. We will take a look at this later. It will be a second approach. In fact, I'll tell you what, let's do it now. In life, we are confronted by problems. Many times, it's a good thing to sleep on them, because when you've done that, and you look at the problem again in the morning, it might have changed, things might have changed. But when you're confronted in life with a problem, one of the things you can do is to stand back from it and walk around it and take a look from another point of view. Let's put it to you this way. Somebody sets you a challenge. You're on a stage in front of 10,000 people, and you walk with a bit of a problem. You're walking on a cane, and some wag says, "Okay, let's see you solve this one." And he says, "There's you, and there's a chair, a common kitchen chair like you might find at a kitchen table. And from where you're stood and where he's put the chair, his challenge is you've got to get over that chair without falling down, or standing on the chair, on the seat. You've got to get over it. In other words, he's put a hurdle in front of you, because what's facing you is the back of the chair." Well, another point of view is if you walk around from 90 degrees, the back is not now in front of you, it's at the side. So you walk up to the chair, you swing your leg over the seat, you swing your other leg over, and you've done it. Another point of view answers many questions in this life. But all too often we don't take the other point of view. We try and battle on, looking at the impossible. So, another point of view on economics. Last year, George Osborne said that the banking system was still in a very curious situation. They did not have the capital to underwrite their activities. He decided that he needed to get 20 billion a month into the banks. And he decided he would lend it to them at 0.75%, 1/4% above Bank of England's base rate. But he also said that they would be required to lend this money, hopefully, to business and industry to promote the regeneration of the British economy. And if they didn't, he'd penalise them by charging them 2.75% interest. Well, last year, 5.9% was the lowest rate you could get for a personal loan. And let me tell you, if I could borrow at 0.75% and even get stiffed into paying 2.75% when I was lending at 5.9, I would borrow that money all day, every day. Be a fool not to. This is where he went wrong. Another point of view says that George Osborne ought to have considered that any money, every last penny of it that the government sees is not their money. It belongs to the people of this country. That's the principle that must be adopted. Now, if he was going to do something to regenerate the economy, traditionally it's when the high street starts to buzz that the economy picks up, right? So instead of lending the people's money to the bank at a low interest rate, you should have given the money to the bank, but on the consideration that it be used on the people's behalf. Now, governments around the world have had ever increasing worries about the amount of indebtedness per household. This is the total amount of money that we owe on mortgages, personal loans, credit cards and the rest of it. And if you know the number of households in the country, you can cut the average, and it might have been like £12,000 per house on average. Right, well, one house might have owed 200 grand, but the house next to it might have had 200 grand in the bank and the house paid for. So, one goes against the other, but you get an average figure that you can attribute to your household indebtedness in the country. And it went 12,000, 14, 16, and it was continually rising because the banks were lax with lending. They were lending mortgages that were over 100% of the value of the house, and they lent it on the premise that house prices have always gone up and will always do so. They were giving personal loans to people that might have been a couple of £1,000 above what they really thought they could afford to pay back. So they were reckless in their lending. And all of this helped to increase the indebtedness per household. Now, George Osborne, going back to what I said, if he'd given the 20 billion a month to the banks, but on the premise that they used it on behalf of the people. In other words, the amount of money going into the bank in the month had to be attributed to their bad debt list. So, somebody who's £10,000 behind with the mortgage repayment suddenly gets that 10,000 wiped off. Somebody who's £2,000 behind on the payments on their personal loan, that £2,000 gets wiped off. And month by month, all of this indebtedness is cleared. People are no longer wondering which day the bailiff's going to turn up to repossess their home. People are feeling that that £50 a month they were trying to find to pay towards their arrears is now money they can spend in the high street on food and clothes for the kids, school uniforms, stuff like that. That policy would effectively turn the housewife out of being a debtor, trying to catch up, into becoming a consumer once more. Now the problem with it is it's politically unacceptable, because if George Osborne did that, the Labour Party and all the rest of them would be crying about, oh no, you're buying the votes. You'll get re-elected every time because you bought the votes. This is the politics of it. But the reality is this: if he did that and the housewife was back on the high street spending again, suddenly the shops in the high street are doing a bit better. What's the knock-on from that? Well, all of these empty premises on the high street, there's people looking at them and thinking it's a hell of a good deal. If only the climate was better. And when those people see that those premises are still empty and the deal is still on, but the feel factor on the high street has now gone up a good few points, it's going to be like, okay, we'll do it now. So these places, before they can open for business, they need the shop fitters in. So suddenly the shop fitters have got a bigger order book than they used to have. Now as this is happening, the councils are getting a bit more money in on the rents and council tax and rates. So they're asking for less from the government. Things have suddenly got a little bit better for the council. But the other big biggie is all these building sites stood there empty, big black holes in the middle of city centres. There is a developer that owns the land. He has a list of customers that say, yeah, when that's built I'll have a shop there, but what we'll do is keep it in abeyance for now. We'll let you know when it's right time to do it. Suddenly, if the high street's feeling good and looking good and people are coming back and money's being spent, these people are going to have these shops and they've got letters of intent with the developer. It's going to be like, hey, when are you going to get building? We want to be in there in 6 months. So suddenly the developer's got the confidence that will allow him to go to the bank and get the money to do the build. When the build starts, well, the structural steel people are doing a bit better and the guys making the bricks are doing a lot better. And all the specialist shop fitters, yeah, okay, they've got to come in and fit the shops out. There's suddenly a buzz going on. And all of those people with businesses that supply parts for builders, and putting buildings together, they're all doing better. Now, building is a very labour-intensive industry. So a lot of people who were on the dole are now working and paying taxes. So there's money going in from their wages in tax, but the money that used to be coming out of the government's coffers to pay them benefit is no longer coming out. Would you believe it seems like we've got a kickstart to the economy? We're bowling along. The only people not happy about it is the banks, because when it comes to the year end, they no longer have a bad debt list to claw back against their tax liability. Therefore, they've got a lot more tax to pay. Now, that is a big boost to the economy, to the treasury, but the banks are now in trouble because they have not got enough money out there in the market on loan to provide the profits needed to be an increase for next year, to provide the shareholders with what they're looking for in the way of dividends. And all this money has gone in, but it hasn't gone out because what it's covered is only paper debt. That paper no longer exists, but the money hasn't had to go out to pay it. The people never saw the money. All they saw was the millstone coming off their neck. So now the banks have got to find something to do with the money. Let's explain lending. First tier lending is the almost zero risk. A mortgage. If it goes wrong, you can reclaim the house. Personal loan. In both cases, there's a known amount of money going out of the bank, but a known regular income coming back, and a known profit margin. It's very containable. Second tier lending is credit cards, because they have a measure of control in that they give you a limit, you can't go beyond it. But in reality, if you approach the limit, they usually extend it if they see you're a good customer. But on a credit card, if you've got a £2,000 limit, you could go out and max that £2,000 in first day, and after that only pay the £25 a month that you've got to pay, whatever the minimum payment would be on what you've borrowed. So there's a potential for funds to go out of the bank, but only come back at a drip feed rate. That's why that's second tier lending. Third tier lending is different. Third tier lending is to business and industry, because a company might show £500,000 profit this year and next year only £5. You don't know. It's not easy to assess. Now, so strictly speaking, the banks want to lend money, but not to business and industry, whereas the government's requirement is, we are giving you all this money, we want you to lend it to business and industry. It's a very difficult one. Now, the housewife, having been relieved of the millstone round her neck, over 90% of them won't be stupid enough to go back to the bank and take another personal loan out. Some will do. These are the serial borrowers, those who can't look after money, who are terrible in finance, and generally speaking their history will show the bank not to lend. And the banks have been reined in on their mortgage lending. They are having to obey the rules somewhat. They have also been given some serious guidance on personal loans. So they have got to be, it's not an open market to them like it was before, one they could just get hold of and abuse, misuse, the way they did, that took us into the trouble that we got. The high street banks are now having to fight to lend the money that they need to lend to make the profits that they need to make, and the only market is business and industry. We therefore might possibly think that in the past, where business and industry hardly ever spoke to the bank because they knew it was pointless, the only answer you ever got was no before you asked the question. The SMEs, small to medium enterprises that could use a bit of money to expand and create a few jobs and become a bigger, more successful company, might now be getting peppered by the high street banks competing to lend them money. But there's a bigger fish in the sea now. After the 2008 crash, my website, Caustic Bites, was calling for something called the Bank for British Business. In the budget in 2012, George Osborne legislated for the Bank for British Business. They used exactly the same name as I used on my website. So I'm quietly hopeful that maybe I did a bit of something good there. But let's look at lending. On the high street, if a small to medium company went and asked to borrow 5 million, the bank would say, will I get my money back? And if they got to a yes on that one, they would say, do I believe they will maintain the payments? Yes. Therefore, will I make the profit? Yes. But the Bank for British Business will ask all those questions. But because of what it is, a bank that's lending the taxpayers' money directly to business and industry to influence the economy, their other question would be, do we think this will be of great benefit to the economy? So there's a slightly different criteria for lending for the BBB than there is for the high street. All of this means serious competition, and therefore business being able to borrow money at the rate that it can afford, the interest rate that it can really afford, not the ridiculous interest rates that are being asked before. So if we did this, we could reasonably expect after 12 months that the economy wouldn't be rising at 1.2%, to be round about 3% or maybe more. There's one reservation here, and that is when the mortgages arrears have been dealt with and there's no more arrears on personal loans, then the input of money into the banks will be to deal with credit card excesses. We would have to be sure that that only went into the banks that operated and financed their own credit card. Some people offer you a credit card and it's operated by MBNA in Cheshire. Well, MBNA is the Bank of America, and we certainly could not be paying off people's debts who owned MBNA cards, because we'd be putting British money into the American bank. So there needs to be a bit of care there. But the deal here is, should it all work that way, other countries around the world might see how well Britain was doing because of a change in thinking from the Victorian attitude of, oh, they borrowed it, they pay it back. Under these conditions, they borrowed it, they're paying it back, but through an intermediary. The intermediary being the government, who is holding their money. If other countries saw this and said, okay, we'll do that. Excuse me, we'll do that. We would see countries around the world having surging economies. We would have invented something, not quantitative easing, which is where the country's bank covertly buys a lot of government bonds and is effectively printing money to finance the government under the table. This would be for real, open, honest and above, on the table, around the world. We would have invented global easing. The world would be a different place, I promise you. We have problems. We might look at China, the world's second largest economy, and the place where we all got to buy stuff because it's cheap, but now it's got quality, whereas before it was cheap and tacky. Nowadays so much comes from China that the world buys. The Chinese have got, what was it, last count, about $1.5 trillion American dollars sitting there, and promissory notes for a lot more that was owed. They hold currencies from around the world. But what is the problem with China? Their economy has increased at 7.5 to 11.5% per annum, and it's done that because they have embarked upon a total rebuilding of the infrastructure. building of new industrial facilities, building of towns and even cities to house the people who are going to work in those factories and run those industries. But all of this has been done on something underlying, which is borrowing. If you look at all the money China's supposed to get, it's far, far outweighed by the amount of money they owe. Many think that the amount of money that the Chinese owe can never be paid back. Humber Bridge job. But you know, Humber Bridge, we don't hear about it anymore. Seems to be doing well. They must be paying the bills, otherwise we'd have heard about it. So, well, you know, whilst China is a threat, it's not one that we should worry about at the moment. We should worry about the world's financial system. As I said, it fell down in 1929. We picked it up and we put a few band-aids and plasters on their wounds. It fell down in 2008. We picked it up and we put some new plasters over the old ones. We haven't fixed it. But if the world is involved in a new regime brought upon by the new economics, then the likelihood of a financial collapse has gone into the far distant future. And we have plenty of time to keep our fingers on the pulse, watch what's happening, and if it starts changing, we need to be looking at how it might be fixed. But we've now got a world where most people are employed, most people are doing a bit better, most people can afford to buy the food. This would even work in third world countries where people are starving. We could take them out of starvation by integrating them into the world. Financial regeneration brought about by another point of view on debt. Right? We have to think about 3 strikes and you're out. The world financial system has given us 2 warnings. If it's 3 strikes and you're out, the next one is serious. If we do nothing and we allow the world financial situation to go forward as it has been doing, without doing anything serious about fixing it, the next time it decides to fall, it might be a total collapse. I'd like you to think about what that would mean. We have a hero, nice guy. His wife is formidable. He's scared shitless of her. So he wakes up in the morning. He's on the dole, this guy. Wife and 2 kids. He wakes up, it's about 10 o'clock, and wife says to him, okay, you take that card and go down to ATM at supermarket. We've got 10 quid left in there. You go in, you get your 10 quid, go in the supermarket. First thing you do is buy me a packet of fags, because you know how lovely I am and I haven't got a smoke on me. And then with what's left, you buy something for the kids for tea. Okay, we've had the world financial collapse. He gets down to the ATM and it's not taking any cards. There's a note that says this machine is currently out of order, please apply to head office. He thinks, oh, that's alright, so around the corner, I'll go there. So he goes round to the main bank of the branch of the bank that they deal with. And there's about 200 people stood around outside. There's a big notice in the window saying this branch is shut until further notice. There are no funds on the premises. So he says, what's cracked then? So it's shut and no knowing when it's going to open again. So some wag says, well, Gordon Brown's government guaranteed us all up to 50 grand. If we got money in there, he guaranteed we could get it. So somebody else says, yeah, okay, tell me where the nearest government office is. We'll go and knock on the door and ask them to give us some money, shall we? So by the time they've done, and everybody's got a different point of view, our hero says, well, I tell you what, there's no way I'm going home to Argurt without the fags and something for kids to eat. So I'm going back round the corner to the supermarket. I'm going in there. I will write them down my name and address and tell them I'll pay them when I can get out my money. And I'm going to take out of there the fags and the food. And if security man gets hit, well, he's going down. 10 minutes later, there's 200 people running around the supermarket taking what they want. 48 hours later, every shop and every supermarket is empty. They're all shut, locked up, boarded up. If you go anywhere near a wholesale distributor like Macro, you'll find half a dozen guys sat outside with guns. They're not the police. They're the local governments. The city's hard cases. They decided they're having all that for themselves, and if you go anywhere near, you're dead. Police? If you amalgamate the armed forces and the police, and you armed all the police, there would be 200,000 maximum people trying to hold back over 30 million people between the ages of 16 and 65 that are looking to find food. This is the break of society by anarchy. So, if money's worth nothing anymore, there'll be no gas and electricity, because nobody's going to go to work and get paid in money that they can't spend, because whatever they want to spend it on isn't there anymore. There'll be no public transport. So what is the currency now? Number one on the currency list is fresh drinking water. You need a litre a day. After 3 days with no water, your brain does not work properly anymore. You can't make good decisions. Second on the list, edible food. After 3 weeks of no food, your brain deteriorates in the same way as after 3 days without water. So, number 3 on the currency list is a weapon, an ammunition, a machete and a length of rope. Why? Well, when you've got your wife and kids locked up and you're thinking in your own mind they're safe, you've got to go out and get your food and your water. And when you go out, you'll bump into another human being doing the same. The first thing you do is kill them, because if you don't, they'll kill you. When you've killed them, you hack the arms and the legs off and tie them up with a rope, get them over your shoulders and take them back to where you're shacked up. That's your food for the next week. You're going to have to eat it raw. There's no gas or electric, you can't do any cooking. And if you start a fire, well, you're only telling other people where you are. But now you've got your food, you've got to go back out and get the water. After a few months of that, the 7 billion people on this earth will be reduced to about 70 million. We're back in the dark ages. There's no gas, there's no electricity. The only way you can live is to form together in little tribes. Each will be doing a job, each will be watching each other's back against any invader. That's the world your grandchildren are going to have, if we don't fix the financial system. So, my friends, told your politicians what's happening now is not good enough. Told your politicians you'd like to embark upon the idea I've just given you of how to regenerate your economy. Let's get the world moving and keep it moving. The next video is going to be the hardest. You might all cry when you see it. And that video will be on population control, the population trap. See you soon.